Back in the days when we were colored, as they say, many educated African Americans might be able to remember the oft-repeated phrase of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., spoken even during his sermon in December 1963, that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. But preachers have a funny habit of borrowing the words of great preachers before them. And these words were actually coined by his mentor, who stayed in our family home just a few years before his death. The born-to-rebel man from the town of 96, South Carolina, Dr. Benjamin Mays. Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays. And perhaps a few may have learned this on the Frontline interview with Harvard professor Dr. Henry Louis Skippy Gates, when he stated to June Croft on PBS, Benjamin Mays said famously that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning was the most segregated hour in America. Well, I got news for Benjamin Mays. 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is still the most segregated hour in America, but the difference is today it's by choice, then it was by force. We had no plan for our larger movement into American society. None of us could possibly plan for that. But as Arlington Public School Board member Monique O'Grady said when she was running for a seat to change an allegedly offensive name on a high school, rather than address a century-and-a-half-old achievement gap, life is the test, and this is one. On Father's Day weekend 2015, I had the unique privilege to sit in the back pews of at least 6 of the remaining churches in Virginia's 8th Congressional District, as well as my former historic African American Baptist Church of Shiloh Baptist in the nation's capital, a church that actually relocated from that wonderful Bible displayed in a movie from Fredericksburg, fleeing the battle and relocating to the District of Columbia. And my unique observation attending both Protestant and Catholic places of worship on that in the most educated, least religious, and most reliable district for Democrats or Republicans, rated 59th, was that every Caucasian worship service celebrated another Father's Day, celebrating patriarchy in song, prayer, and sermon. But in every African American church, tearful eyes, woeful countenances, hushed conversations filled the sanctuary as they paused to remember the dead and wounded after a massacre the prior week in a church in South Carolina, with prepared presentations that feature the faces and names of the fallen. And at the historic Alfred Street Baptist Church in Old Town, Alexandria, where on an Easter, the former president appeared with his family while they sang He Lives, the largest church in the 8th Congressional District. Pastor Howard John Wesley even decided to change the sermon, preaching from the text in a book of Ephesians that told his congregation to be angry, but do not sin. I had sat in the back pew of that historic black church that had in the 19th century separated from my present home church of First Baptist, Church of Alexandria, to hear many a sermon like one on Paul and Silas and the elements of a prayer program, about the story of Hannah and the need to address your particular situation, and about the great Samson who fell because he got fixated on his feelings and not focused on the facts. But on that somber Sunday morning, the preacher made it clear, very clear, that he was fully prepared, come what may, with regard to any potential violence, because he had a concealed weapons permit. And I turned to my neighbor and said, let the church say amen when you get to the page. And on that front, we say even the former fighter John Lewis sitting on a floor of the Congress, trying to relive his days of protest while crying, "No bill, no break," not long before leaving for break with no bill. And we saw flags on state houses come down that bore resemblance to the regimental battle flag for the Army of Northern Virginia, while racial tensions grew to their highest point in history, ironically during the administration of the first African-American president. Many promises were made, but no real promises were kept, and people woke up surprised. When gun violence erupted in gay nightclubs, we found Congressman Don Beyer changing his profile picture on social media to a rainbow flag to stand in solidarity with the fallen and mourning. Having rejected a proposal I had proposed for a Sentinel program that I had prepared and which was later discussed and broad outlined by the current president at the meeting of CPAC after his election, which would have sought to prioritize the use of persons with prior experience with the use of firearms under combat-like situations, to be on the ready in soft targets like high schools, that found Congressman Beyer actually later sitting in a church in the dark and lighting candles, as if the magic flame would cast a spell to make all problems go away. But they did not, and we found another promise made and promise broken. So pray no one woke up surprised when the life of a young accountant and son of immigrants from Iran, who truly believed that America was a greater place from whence they came to seek an American dream, Congressman Beyer and others not doing anything of substance other than sitting on a bench and looking angry and donning a tearful face at a vigil where a mourning brother told the press that each year his family, regardless of the occupant of the White House, like all Americans, gathered with many Americans to watch the lighting of the Christmas tree, where, but not for the circumstance, he would rather be. And like the brother of Bijan Gazar, I too would rather be celebrating Christmas than mourning. Accordingly, upon the review of the released videotape, it will more likely than not never see the inside of a courtroom because the press that promoted it worldwide have actually worked to the detriment of the family they claim to be assisting, making it prejudicial and inadmissible in court and permit the law enforcement officers who are claiming self-defense to testify and present their case on the merits without an emotional video or crying mama to sway the jury to tears. It may help you feel better, but never do anything of substantive value in the realm of real change in a courtroom. No man with common sense would ever walk into a courtroom without an attorney, unless he knew the law as well as any other attorney, or better than, and only a fool would simply walk into a court and hope for mercy, not grounded in fact nor law. Yet even progressives with law degrees say to victims of gun violence to take away their guns. Forget about a home being your castle, the form which is the basis of the criminalized offense of trespass, and forgetting about a right to self-defense and standing your ground to wait for law enforcement. But what happens if your law enforcement are the cops who arrived for Bijan Ghassan? What are you going to do? Call the police. They are the police. Well, in the days before Dixiecrats retained power in the South, as they did in 1883, the last election of a Republican mayor of Alexandria, the Party of Emancipation not only passed the first Civil Rights Act in 1866, but former Union General Ulysses S. Grant was one of the founding fathers of the NRA, formed to act as a sentinel program for newly freed slaves, to provide them an equalizer and enforcer against racial discrimination that might remain after a civil war. And back in those days, we saw the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, which by the 1920s lynched so many persons that the NAACP was formed to specifically address that problem. But they were way too late to prevent my grandfather, who was not permitted to own a firearm, from being shot in the head, like Bajan Gazar, because the Ku Klux Klan thought that he looked a lot like he was going to vote. And that single act not only prompted the relocation of an entire family with 3 small children in desperate and frenzied flight to the north, but also nearly irreparably wrecked the financial foundation of that family. Yet, to the day of his death, my grandfather always voted Republican in the city of brotherly love, and oft repeated the phrase, "My God ain't dead yet, and neither am I." The founding fathers, like James Madison, considered the problem that not all men are angels, making government necessary, but a cautious John Adams considered the restraining government by self-discipline required to preserve a rule of law found in a moral and religious people, so that no tyrannical spirit might ruin a great idea and experiment in democracy. And a lack of self-restraint by state actors veiled under color of law with official law enforcement uniforms left one unwitting victim in a state of nature, ending a life solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, by function of a doctrine, jurisprudential in nature, most recently visited by the U.S. Supreme Court, called excessive force. But unlike the case before the Supreme Court, the events in Northern Virginia, where hate is said to have no home, did not, like that matter in the highest court, involve a woman with a knife, not even an arm's distance of law enforcement, but rather an individual who committed no crime to prompt his pursuit, and who did not even create a charge of reckless driving in a disciplined manner to escape law enforcement, presented themselves to him with guns drawn, and who, when he stopped for a stop sign, finally closed in to trap him, shooting him 4 times in the left side of the head and 1 in the right hand wrist, with a total of 9 shots fired, and with the final shots delivered by an officer at short range, looking into a broken driver's side window where he could clearly see that the fleeing suspect was clearly immobilized and presenting no danger before the vehicle rolled of its own momentum onto its side in a ditch near a stop sign where he had stopped while being pursued so as not to create a reckless driving situation. I, too, would rather be celebrating Christmas. In excessive force cases, the courts grant great deference to the determination of law enforcement officers who place themselves in harm's way and are required to make split-second decisions about life and death, as it should be, and generally is in combat. However, in situations as occurred in November 2017, which left many in tears, while Congressman Byers' only solution was to demand more cameras immediately after the tragic video had already been released, legislation that has yet to be enacted. However, what I am proposing is the All Lives Matter Defense Act that would create a rebuttable presumption defeating an allegation of excessive force unless there is a showing by clear and convincing evidence of clear prejudice or a disregard for proper apprehension and arrest procedures in any misdemeanor case or lesser offense, and authorizing in self-defense for the victim the use of the minimum force necessary to repel the attack. Or to use the vernacular, if you are a dinda or didn't do nothing, You may be authorized to speak power to power, meeting physical force with soul force in a statutory defense of necessity. But it is your body, and it is your choice. Nobody is mandating that you go out and get a gun. This measure addresses the unarmed victims about which progressives cry and puts power back in their hands. And this measure should work to appease the fears in inner cities and minority communities who remain concerned about such offenses as they are now unable to stand their ground. Ironically, in Democratic Party-controlled cities, too often, but for which the current president finds blame nonetheless. And I am asking Congressman Don Byron and his Democratic colleagues to join in sponsoring this critical legislation in the current Congress, or give a substantive reason why it should not be done. And so in November, it is a referendum election where you have the power to choose between the party of manumission, slavery, oppression, Jim Crow, and subjugation, or to choose the party of emancipation. In November, you have the power to choose between the party of welfare entitlement and government dependency, or the party of opportunity. In November, you have the power to choose between the party of underperforming public schools and achievement gaps, or the party of school choice. You have the power to choose between the party of mandatory union membership or the party of a right to work. You have the power to choose between the party of universal socialized medicine or the party that will let you choose your provider and your doctor and your insurance plan. In November, you have the power to choose between the party of awaiting the arrival of law enforcement or the party of the right to stand your ground and defend yourself. In November, you have the power to choose between the party of higher taxes and growing bureaucracies, or the power of lower taxes and self-determination. It is your party and it is your choice. I am a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican, in that order. And I am not ashamed of the gospel. My name is Major Mike Webb, and I am running for U.S. Congress. Not unmindful of the future, with liberty and excellence. Let's make America great again. Honest. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.